Welcome back to Driven by Dreams. Today's guest is Wadina Mushtarin, Chief Strategy Officer at Ohana One and a seasoned entrepreneur with a career spanning business consulting, finance, and strategy. Wadina has built a reputation for her ability to pivot, adapt, and create value, especially for the next generation of business leaders and women in particular. I'm excited to dive into her journey and the lessons she's learned along the way. Hi, Wadina. It's great to have you here.
Great, thank you for having me.
I'm excited to learn more about you and your journey.
Sure. Well, I graduated in the early 90s. I went to Yale University. When I was trying to select my major, I actually decided on something very analytical, not business, because I thought that would give me the most sort of um, a major that I could do something with. Initially, I thought I would go into academia, but I started off with a mathematics degree and then added on physics before I graduated. So this was early 90s. It was a liberal arts education, so I was able to take courses in not only math and physics, which was my major, but a whole slew of different subject areas. So, in my senior year, as I was about getting ready to graduate and trying to think of my life options for the next stage of my life, um, there were two clear paths. One was going into the workforce, corporate, or go to get a further degree in either a master's or a PhD and pursue a career in academia or research. And I decided to just pause the second and thought I would try out the first option to see what was out there with a math and physics degree. I didn't have a degree in finance or business or any of those fields. However, I found as I started talking to different companies that it did not matter. They were very, very open to talking to me and interviewing, graduating seniors with degrees in any sort of field that it was analytical, very broad-based analytics, very sort of like, that they could work with to sort of hone in the skills in a business setup. So it did not, it was actually to my advantage, I found, to graduate in sort of a field that I could pivot, one, and two, that was sort of amenable to different industries. So I had options in finance or consulting, management consulting in New York City, which was a good pathway from, students from Massachusetts, Connecticut, all the way down to Pennsylvania. A lot of us were looking for jobs in that sort of market. So starting from the big cities, Boston, New York City, and all of that. So I would say the first, um, this is, I graduated in 94. So from 94 to 2000, the 6 years, it was a pretty traditional sort of work that I did. So this was from 94 all the way through 98, 2000. I was still very much a very traditional sort of consulting role where I was exposed to a lot of different types of clients that worked in many, many different industries. But I also got to work with people from different universities in the East and West Coast that were very driven, passionate, ambitious. We learned from each other, we grew, and we had these amazing teams that were cross functional and did a lot of very important and interesting work. and we worked very, very hard. That was just our the way things were back then, and still is to some extent. But um, we worked very hard to get a foothold, and especially since I was working in New York City, which, as we know, is the epicenter of, Wall Street and in the consulting companies as well. So, flash forward a few years, I reached a part of my career where I thought to go to the next stage, although it wasn't absolutely necessary. I thought it would be very interesting to add an MBA to the mix, although I was debating whether to do a PhD in mathematics or get an MBA. And at this point, I decided an MBA would be the best fit for me because I was very much enjoying the business aspect of applying my undergraduate education to a business setup, and not having done a formal training in, say, finance or accounting or any of these things in my undergraduate. I thought that would be a good sort of repertoire to add to my resume. So I went back to business school right in the center of the city at NYU Stern School of Business, which is the number one school in finance. Um, and I majored in, it was 2 years, very intensive MBA course. We were taught by the best of the best in Wall Street, in management consulting. Um, Wall Street was right at our doorstep, so the professors would just walk in, teach, and then go back and do some other work in Wall Street. So I had the privilege of working with the best names in finance and in consulting, and to learn from them. And what I found that was different with the MBA than a more sort of, my undergraduate experience was that it gave us a lot of exposure, gave me a lot of exposure to real world problems. So we would solve actual business cases from the 70s all the way to present, and try to solve them, through different techniques, and then present and hone on those skills. So it really sort of fine tuned what I'd already learned on the job, but it was more formal. I got to work with very, very interesting. My classmates came from a very interesting backgrounds, and some of them came from very different backgrounds than me. So it was very interesting to form those teams and solve those problems. Um, After my MBA, I went back into more of a traditional consulting role. One, I really enjoyed that space. My internship between my first and second year was actually in finance, in a company in Wall Street, in a big name company in Wall Street. However, I didn't find, and that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, helping younger generation, is really finding that fit, and why it's so important. Because unless I did that internship and put myself out there, I wouldn't know that it wasn't something that I loved to do. It was fine for, paying the bills and getting the job done and getting my resume amped up. However, was I is it something that will make me wake up early in the morning to go do? I figured out through that internship that it wasn't. So consulting, on the other hand, business consulting, I was very passionate about that. I felt I was more impactful in that area, and it's something that makes me wake up in the morning and get to work without, complaints. So after my MBA, I was still in very much traditional roles, I would say. In between all of that, I raised a family. So I was balancing, as with any women between the 30 and 40 age group, some of us have to do this, I almost say, incredible task of balancing both a family life and work life. and it's not always been easy. It was very challenging. And at this point, we're talking, 2002 all the way through 2008. My kids were very young, and it's sort of supporting both these needs was a huge balancing act, right? So it wasn't until I would say I always kept my foot in the door career wise. However, I did pull back from my hours in any way I could. For me, the easiest way was cutting down on travel, because with a consulting job, in some cases, I would be traveling Monday through Thursday outside of the country, come back Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then do the same thing again the following week. Not exactly the best lifestyle to have when you have small kids in the house. So, flash forward then to 2012. My kids were a little bit older. We moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was then when I started just noticing a different sort of business landscape, I would say, here in the West Coast. I found that the East Coast was still very much traditional in many ways, whereas on the West Coast, they seemed to be a lot more willing to take on more risk, perhaps more. There was a more of an entrepreneurial spirit here, and that's when I started thinking about starting my own company, where I craved not only the flexibility, but I'd also already, put in my many, many years of traditional work and contributed to the workforce. And then I felt it was time to sort of use all of that IP and put it into something of my own. So I think it gave me those two things that I was craving for, which was flexibility and that it's a challenge, but in a different way than challenge of going into traditional sort of companies. So I like to say that my entrepreneurial journey started from when I immigrated to the US in 1990 as an international student. And that was not an easy move, to move from, I lived in many, many different continents, but coming to the US, it was my first time in the US. So I would like to say actually my entrepreneurial journey started from that moment, not really 2012 when I actually went and did something about it, because I think it's a mindset, right? It's that mindset and that sort of, I want to take a risk. I may fail at this, but I'm going to try to do this. Making that move in 1990, and I tell this to all the students that want to apply to Yale, and I've interviewed so many for the last 25 years, but because that move basically cemented the fact that I wanted to do something outside my comfort zone, right? So I had to push the boundaries from then, and then being in the workforce as a woman of color in the 90s and making an impactful sort of change in New York City was another sort of like pivotal time. And then moving to California was when it really all came together. But that's why I like to start my journey with my undergraduate experience, although it seems like eons ago. But I think the whole story makes sense when you look at it as a sort of my journey from that 18-year-old student coming with absolutely zero idea. We didn't have the luxury to visit colleges before we decided which college to go to, right? As your generation does. absolutely nothing except just the brochures and all of that. And that's how we made our college choices. And so there's definitely a lot of courage and risk that you had to have to do that journey and make that commitment. So I'd like to say my journey started from that point onwards. And yeah, so that's pretty much an overall sort of, if I can just talk about the journey. However, if you have any more specific questions that you'd like to ask based on what I've told you, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, you have an amazing journey. Um, those are some great things you've done.
Thank you.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced when starting your business, and how did you overcome them?
I think for me, the biggest sort of challenge was shifting my own mindset from being very focused on one aspect of the business to being wearing all these different hats, right? So when you're going into this idea, I mean, it sounds great on paper. However, when you actually take it to fruition and you're dealing with, starting from just building a business plan, then dealing with finance, accounting, marketing, what's the product, what's the service, HR, dealing with legal, taxation, um, figuring out the process of the company. And this is all internal. Then we're talking external, which is how do we face customers? How do we onboard customers? How do we, so the marketing piece of it, right? So, and then looking at appeasing investors or partners, right? That's another prong. So suddenly your role can go from, you could be a very good at one thing, and then suddenly you have to be reasonably good at many, many things happening all at once, right? So I like to look at it as, you know, a Jane of all trades. You suddenly have to, learn and relearn a lot of things that maybe you saw once in your lifetime in an MBA class from my 2000, which is 24 years ago now, right? So, and things have changed in a lot of ways, but they've also remained constant in a lot of ways. So, how to get the best of both worlds, right? My biggest challenge was shifting into that sort of mode, and then finding beauty in that challenge, right? So it's not just, hey, this is very challenging and I'm gonna now wallow in self-pity, and also, why the hell am I printing business cards? I had interns do this for me 30 years ago, and now why am I at Kinko's? Kind of that mindset where you have to do everything, it doesn't matter what, to get the job done. And finding beauty in that, right? So for me, especially, I love to talk to the younger generation because the ideas that they have and bring to the table, are always amazing. So not only shifting my mindset, but the ones that are maybe in the boardroom with me. Hey, let's give this person 10 minutes of our time. We may think we know everything, but they might have one awesome idea that they would like to talk about. Whether we shoot it down or not is a different story, but just to give a voice to the young generation so that they have a seat at the table, for me is very motivating, right? So no matter the challenges of running a small business or a growing business, I'd like to say, it always comes with, there's a beauty, right, in all of these challenges.
You mentioned doing business consulting. So, how does someone who want to be an entrepreneur, how should they think about strategy?
About strategy. it's very well, there are millions of books out there about just this topic, right? And then if you narrow it even down to entrepreneurial strategy, right? It's so unique to each company and to each business because every business is unique, right, in its makeup, whether it's by virtue of the employees, the partners, or whoever is starting the business. It could be the nature of the business. It could be a whole bunch of factors, right? So my my take on strategy would be it has to be one size cannot fit all, right? So I could sit here and tell you 10,000 things about strategy consulting, which is a big field in and of itself, right? However, it's so unique to the company itself that you really need to go there, figure out what are their processes, what is it that they're trying to achieve, what is it that they're trying, what value are they bringing, what's their value proposition, is it, if it's a service, what are they hoping to do with the service? So if it's a product, what problem are they trying to solve? Oftentimes, I have found, especially with young companies, is that they might have a great idea, but ultimately, when you go to try to sell it or try to get investment for it, or you know, what is that value add and who's your customer base? These are the big things to look at, right? So in my little world, or in the little world of that company, you might be thinking the value add is amazing because obviously that's why you have the company, you founded it, now you're running it and hoping it will grow and be able to sell. However, it's only when you start talking to customers, and you could do a million market research, but until you're really out there, right, talking to potential customers, could be as hard as just, or as easy as the first one who could look at it and say, hey, you know what, this helped me either on the top line or the bottom line, which is increasing the revenue or decreasing the cost somehow, right? If I'm adding value to any customer and they can pass that on to their employees or other stakeholders, um, that's only when I would say a company is viable, right? So there's a lot more that goes into it, right? Obviously, we know that numbers don't say it all, right? So, you know, many a times you have a startup with two very passionate individuals trying to make a difference in the world through their value add, right? And if you look at it just purely from numbers, it doesn't make sense. However, they have turned out to be successful companies. Why? Because they were driven with so much passion for changing something. So they're change makers, right, in some fields that they're passionate about, and they've done it. And then the numbers start to come, right? Um, so I would say there's not one size fits all again, that, hey, this is a strategy that will work for any startup. You really have to go in there, understand the makeup, the processes, the people, their passion, their drive, all of that. So not only the hard numbers and let me look at your business plan, but also the softer, human side of business. Ultimately, we're still humans doing business. AI is around, but we're not going to be replaced. I'm not one of those believers that, because there's one thing that AI can't do, which is passion. Simple as that, right? So you take a human with some passion in something versus an AI model, zero passion, so there's always going to be that argument, right, that can be made for for passionate individuals. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Wadina. I
Sure.
think this is a good place to wrap this up. So, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Final words of wisdom. I think I would love to see, and I'm hoping that the next generation can sort of take one tool that they have that our generation did not, is information at your fingertips, right? So if you listen to all these different podcasts and all of that, you'll see that your generation is blessed and cursed with the power of information. You no longer have to run to the library, run to wait till you discover something by pouring through books and all of that, or talking to a million people. Information is power. It's all there. Harvard, MIT, and now MIT has open courseware, right? If you want to learn something, it's there for you for free, right? So there's so much there. It's a matter of turning this from just a whole bunch of information that's out there. What can you take from it to your advantage, right? And make use of it, right? So it's not just information for the sake of information, but take it, use the power that it has to do something with it, right? That's what I would hope to see from the next generation of entrepreneurs, movers and shakers, change makers, whatever you want to call them.
Well, I've gained a lot from your insights and experiences, Wadina, so thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.